Last time we talked about how a single flower could be worth more than a house. It was insane, but it was local. Today, we're taking it to a new level. Imagine the year 1720, a year when the two greatest empires in Europe simultaneously decided that the laws of economics no longer applied. In Paris, one man convinced an entire nation that paper was the new gold, and that the wildlands of Mississippi were a source of infinite wealth. In London at the same time, people were buying shares in a company promising untold riches from South American trade, even though its actual trade was far smaller than investors were told. Let me be frank, these aren't just stories about money. These are stories about Windhandel, the trade of wind, about prisoner weddings, political corruption, and how Isaac Newton, one of the greatest minds in history, lost a fortune because he followed the crowd. We're heading to 1720, the year the world went mad. Hi, I'm Frank. If you missed our deep dive into Tulip Mania, one of the first speculative bubbles in modern history, check the info card or the link in the description below. But today, the stakes are higher. We're breaking down two bubbles that burst almost at the same time. This is a story about how governments tried to solve their mountain-sized debts by literally trying to print their way out of a crisis while selling people a dream. And why these stories almost always end the same way. Let's start with France. Meet John Law, a Scotsman, a high-stakes gambler, and a duelist who had to flee England after killing a man in a duel. But Law wasn't just a rogue, he was a financial experimentalist. When he arrived in France, the country was essentially bankrupt after the long wars of Louis XIV. National debt was soaring, gold was scarce, and the economy was suffocating. Law proposed a radical idea: replace some of the gold and silver coins with paper banknotes. He created a bank, issued these notes, and convinced the French authorities that this new system would revive the economy. But for people to trust paper, they needed a great dream. That dream was the Mississippi Company. The company was granted a monopoly on trade and development in French Louisiana, a massive territory in North America. Law told investors about unimaginable riches that were supposedly hidden in those lands. The problem was that in reality, the vast Louisiana territory remained almost empty. At the time, fewer than 1,000 European settlers lived there. It was a massive startup with no product. And this is where the story gets truly strange. The authorities knew that if the colony looked empty, people wouldn't believe in its wealth. A massive marketing campaign began. Newspapers and pamphlets were filled with stories of gold, silver, and incredible opportunities in Mississippi. But almost nobody wanted to move to the dangerous swamps of Louisiana voluntarily. So the government started sending convicts and the poor. Law went as far as offering prisoners freedom on one condition: they had to marry prostitutes and ship off to America immediately. In 1720, several such groups of colonists were actually sent to French Louisiana. Meanwhile, in Paris, financial hysteria took over. People sold their homes, lands, and possessions just to buy shares in the Mississippi Company. Law's bank printed more and more paper money to keep the stock price climbing, and the rising stock prices created an illusion of infinite wealth. The system looked like the perfect money-making machine, as long as people kept believing. While France was losing its mind, Britain was watching across the channel thinking, "We want that too." In 1711, the South Sea Company was founded. The scheme was similar. The company would take over Britain's national debt in exchange for the exclusive right to trade with the Spanish part of South America. On paper, it was a gold mine, but there was a catch. Those rights depended on Spain, a country Britain was constantly at war with. The company's actual trade turned out to be far more modest than the loud promises. Spain strictly limited its activities, and the profits were far from the investors' fantasies. But who cares about facts when the stock is going up? By 1720, the madness hit its peak. South Sea shares were trading at around 128 British pounds in January. By August, they hit nearly 1,000 British pounds, an 8x return in just 6 months. The company management was actively fueling the hype. Rumors of massive profits and soon-to-be-opened new markets were spreading through London. Then, Parliament passed the Bubble Act, a law that restricted the creation of new companies. Officially, it was to fight speculation, but in reality, it just cleared out the competition so that all the capital in the country flowed only into the South Sea Company. This was the greater fool theory in its purest form. People knew the prices were crazy, but believed there would always be a greater fool willing to buy it for more tomorrow. And then comes Sir Isaac Newton. The man who explained the motion of the planets proved powerless against the motion of the crowd. At first, Newton was smart. He bought shares early and sold them for a healthy profit. But then, he watched his friends getting rich even faster. He couldn't stand it classic FOMO. He jumped back in at the very peak of the bubble. When the market crashed, Newton lost a massive amount, over 20,000 British pounds. Today, that's the equivalent of nearly $4 million US. His quote became legendary. "I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." If even one of the greatest scientists in history was caught in a bubble, what chance did everyone else have? And then, it all fell apart. In France, people began to realize the system wasn't backed by gold, but by trust. They rushed to exchange their paper money for coins. John Law's system began to collapse, and Law himself was forced to flee France. This crash undermined the French trust in paper money and banking experiments for years to come. In Britain, the situation wasn't much better. South Sea shares plummeted from around 1,000 British pounds to about 150 British pounds in just a few months. Investigations began. It turned out that company directors had been bribing politicians and influential people to maintain the hype around the stock. Thousands of investors lost their fortunes. What crashed wasn't just the market. What crashed was the belief. The story people believed in had died. Let me be frank. The year 1720 showed one simple thing. When the state and greed unite, a bubble is inevitable. And it didn't stay in the 18th century. We will see these same mechanics again. During the railway mania, the crash of 1929, the dot-com bubble, the 2008 crisis, and the crypto mania of 2021, but we will analyze this in more detail in future videos. Only the scenery changes, but human psychology hardly at all. I'm Frank, and this was frankly about money. Don't be like Newton. Don't just calculate the profit, calculate the risk.